Juneteenth is my 4th of July. It is the point in time which my ancestors were recognized as people.
I think music is absolutely one of the foundational parts of celebrating Juneteenth, for sure.
And it is important that we pay attention not only to the rhythm and the beat, but the message and the meaning of the songs.
At some point, we was like, we got something to say
Bun
too.
B, the Trill OG.
This is what writing is about. This is what singing about it is about.
Where does it come from? Somewhere deep in your soul.
Music is such a part of Black society. It's part of a thing that we have maintained from our ancestors.
If we didn't have our music, I don't know where we'll be.
Juneteenth, 1865 to 2024, a legacy of song.
Welcome to historic Reedy Chapel in Galveston, Texas, a place of worship and praise since 1848.
On June 19, 1865, enslaved people on the island rushed here to Reedy to learn of their freedom.
Together, they would lift their voices in song.
It's those very same songs, along with the songs they sang while forced to work dockside, on plantations, and in fields and on farms, that shaped a legacy of song.
A legacy that started in Africa long before slavery.
The artistic achievements of the Negro are rooted in the rich and ancient cultural heritage of Africa, which in recent times has profoundly influenced all Western art.
Music played a significant role in nearly every aspect of African life. There wasn't a clear-cut time and place for music. There were just different forms that people used for different parts of the day. So you certainly had music that was part of religious ceremonies, but there were also important ways that music was part of labor. So if the fishermen went out in boats to catch fish, maybe they were also doing songs that had a call and response structure as they were catching the fish.
As for instrumentation, the drums were dominant.
Percussion instruments were the most vital to West and Central African music. And when people from other continents made contact with West and Central Africa, the drums are one of the main things that they would comment on. And I think part of that is they produce such loud, full sounds that sometimes you could hear the drumming before you see the people who are producing those very sounds.
The sound of the drum is universal. You don't have to speak a certain language to understand the music. Traveling around the world, going to Brazil, the Caribbean islands and the Caribbean festivals and Carnival and all of that, and then even going over to Ghana when I went, the sound is everywhere. So 55% of the transatlantic slave trade went into Brazil, 35% into the Caribbean islands, only 6% in what we consider the United States or North America. So the majority of that traffic went into Brazil, 55%.
Brazilian sugar plantations drove the demand for slave labor much earlier than the United States, but the new nation would soon catch up naturally as enslaved people started birthing children in the American colonies.
Do you remember any of the slaves being sold? Do you remember any slave sellers, men that would just buy and sell?
No, sir, I never did see it. I should have never did know that, We heard talk of it, but then I think that was after slave, I think. We heard talk of it. You see them talk about, putting them on stumps, or something high, and beating them off like you did cattle. Beat them off like you did cattle.
Tragically, children could be sold away to other plantations and away from their mothers' tender voices.
Let me first talk about lullabies. Mothers, maybe even fathers, sang lullabies to their children. Children played game songs, so they had their own music that they performed. And then there was the celebration music, the harvest celebrations of cotton, of cane, of sugar, of whatever was the cash crop that you were responsible for growing. There's going to be a harvest at some point.
A harvest that was the result of difficult and forced labor in the worst of conditions. But it's while they worked, enslaved people sang along with each other in a painful yet productive way.
They sang to make the work go faster, but it also was a form of engineering mechanical efficiency to sing while you're working.
There was also singing in their slave quarters.
There is a calm ashore to be, it's found beneath the mercy sea. Oh mercy sea, oh mercy sea, it's found beneath the mercy sea. There is a calm ashore to be, around a calm and mercy sea.
The only time they were in the quarters was at night because they were working from sun to sun. And that was the time when there was an opportunity to express intimacy. And I'm sure there were love calls and expressions, and everybody has a voice. You can hum, you can whistle, you can sing, you can yell.
But there were few instruments on plantations.
One of the first things that changes with the Atlantic slave trade is access to instrumentation. In many cases, enslaved Africans have to recreate the instruments that they would have valued back in their homeland. In some cases, that means trying to reconstruct, based on memory and sound, what they'd had before. And in some cases, there's no access to some of those instruments.
This included drums. Thought to be used for communication between enslaved people, they were often forbidden.
By the 1820s, it was very hard to find drums on farms and plantations across the U.S. South because they were used for rebellion.
Left with nothing but their voices to make music, the enslaved developed a song style and sound that would become the hallmark of black music.
Did my Lord deliver that Lord and my not every man? Did my Lord deliver that?
On a recent spring evening, the voices of the Prairie View A&M University Concert Chorale singing an African-American spiritual. It is an HBCU choral tradition that began with the Fisk Jubilee Singers in 1871, just 6 years after the Civil War. Before choirs, spirituals were sung by the enslaved while working the fields, without instruments or for performance. Prairie View A&M Chorale Director Dr. Demetrius Robinson demonstrates with a spiritual classic.
They would have sung it, swing low, sweet chariot.
No music.
No music. Coming for to carry me home. And they would have sung it more with Ebonics, so more closely to their language. Swing low, sweet chariot. Coming for to carry me home. Very a cappella, very spontaneous.
Prairie View sits on property that used to be a plantation, where the enslaved sang the spirituals Dr. Robinson is talking about, songs of joy, pain, and hope for freedom.
Songs became church songs, and by the 1930s, a new genre was born, gospel.
When we think about gospel music as we know it, we have to think about people like Thomas Dorsey.
Dorsey became known as the father of gospel, having written Precious Lord. And at Pilgrim Baptist Church in Chicago, he was pushing spirituals in a different direction. They became more up-tempo, sometimes blurring the lines between sacred and secular.
Basic chord progressions, you might say blues chord progressions. If you close your eyes on Sunday morning,
Gospel choirs exploded in popularity after Dorsey founded the National Convention of Gospel Choirs and Choruses. The music kept evolving, and gospel stars were born, like Mahalia Jackson, Mattie Moss Clark, the Reverend James Cleveland, and Edwin Hawkins, who turned the spiritual "Oh Happy Day" upside down. Dr. Robinson first sings the original version
Oh, happy day, when Jesus washed my sins away. He taught me how to fight and pray. Oh, happy day, very, very traditional, very straightforward.
And then it evolved to what with Edwin Hawkins?
Oh, happy day, oh, happy day, oh, happy day, oh, happy day, and so forth, right?
So it got syncopated?
More syncopated.
It got faster.
Yeah.
Got more secular?
More secular, but also more spontaneous.
From capture to bondage and freedom, spirituals have been woven into the fabric of African American lives.
So every musical style that we know of today, you can trace it back, in America that is, you can trace it back to the spirituals, right? We're talking about gospel, ragtime, jazz, blues, all these different things you can link back to the spiritual.
By 1863, freedom rang, but not for all, despite President Abraham Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation declaring all persons held as slaves be freed.
Many people relate to the Emancipation Proclamation, which President Abraham Lincoln signed in September of 1862 to go into effect January 1st, 1863. Now, on January 1st, 1863, there was a Battle of Galveston, where the Confederate Army took back control of the island, therefore delaying enforcement of the Emancipation Proclamation. It's not just the sharing of the information, but the information has to be enforced. And because the Confederate Army regained control of the port city of Galveston, that delayed enforcement for 2.5 years.
June 18, 1865, U.S. General Gordon Granger and troops arrive in Galveston to issue and enforce General Order No. 3, liberating all enslaved people.
When he came to Galveston, just the city, the island, Granger, of course, went to the Osterman building, and that was the headquarters. And from there issued General Order No. 3.
The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere.
And then the soldiers began to spread the message on the island. But we do know that the soldiers, the Union soldiers, many of them being United States colored troops, would have moved throughout the island, in one of the places being Reedy Chapel, that it is believed through oral histories and stories that the notice was posted on the door. Because the church, of course, is central to the African American community and part of their foundation of faith.
This church is almost as old as Galveston itself.
Reedy Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church, known as the Mother Church of Texas, has withstood the test of time.
Everything that Galveston went through historically, this church went through. We were here when the 1900 storm came, when the 1885 Great Fire of Galveston came, when emancipation came in 1865. This church was already in existence.
Church members are just as resilient as the place where generations have come to pray.
My name is Sharon Baptiste Gillens. I'm a member and trustee here at Reedy Chapel African Methodist Episcopal Church. I've been a member here since the late 80s. Have loved this church since the very first time I came into it.
Sharon is also a genealogist.
I just began to dig and became fascinated with the enormous amount of history that's rooted in this church. We were part of the Methodist Episcopal Church South, which was a predominantly white congregation in this city. And at some point in 1848, they purchased a lot for the benefit of their enslaved people. This is that lot. That meant that the enslaved people who had up to that point been worshiping with the white congregation now moved their worship to this spot and worshiped outdoors until they could build a church edifice for themselves. So once they got here, I'm sure that their music increased, their drumming increased, their preaching increased, and their call and worship increased.
Giving hope to an oppressed people ahead of Emancipation Day on June 19th, 1865.
Juneteenth is my 4th of July. It is the point in time which my ancestors were recognized as people. Before June 19, 1865, I could not research my family as people. I had to research my family as property because that's what they were. They were not listed in vital records. They could not legally marry because they were property.
Property no more, the enslaved were informed of their newfound rights by mostly black soldiers right at Reedy Chapel.
General Gordon Granger and United States colored troops and Union troops arrived here in Galveston not to announce emancipation, but to enforce emancipation. And this church would have been the closest church for African descendants to the port of arrival. It became one of the most important locations for the announcement of emancipation.
And with newfound freedom came a flourish of activity in the church, including acquisition of materials and instruments.
You enter the church and your eye is immediately drawn to the altar, but then what rises above the altar, this organ.
It is a beautiful organ. It's just visually stunning. It's a historic 1872 Hook and Hastings pipe organ. And this pipe organ is only one of two in the nation, and the other one is in the Smithsonian. So it has quite a bit of significance here, and it definitely creates a beautiful backdrop for the pulpit and the altar here.
We actually still have people who are able to play it. It's magnificent.
The music's pushed out of the age-old pipes, up toward the heavens and into the chapel. The sounds are captivating, moving people in the pews during Sunday service. Together, they sing and give gratitude for their faith, their freedom, and most of all, the church.
So that's our history. That's our heritage. That's not only Reedy's history, it's Galveston's history, it's Texas history, and it's United States history.
Houston is home to some of music's biggest stars. Real hometown heavyweights, worthy of the spotlight.
Lift every voice and sing.
young, gifted, and black.
From college concert halls to intimate venues and grand theaters like here at the Wortham Center and beyond.
Classically trained musicians and singers have a bright future ahead, thanks to the greats of the past.
Marian Anderson, singing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1939. She later became the first black soloist at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. The acclaimed soprano Leontine Price hit the Met stage in 1961. George Shirley became the first black tenor to sing leading roles at the Metropolitan Opera. Just a few of the names who blazed a trail for a growing number of African American opera singers today.
My teacher says our voices should be like a bird that we let fly.
That new generation includes tenor Lawrence Brownlee and Houston-based soprano Nicole Heaston. Their journey to classical music started in the church.
I grew up in church, in gospel, but a high school choir teacher told me that something about the tone of my voice was suitable for opera. And I didn't really know what opera was about until I was exposed to it.
When I started winning competitions in high school and I was like, okay, I can make money doing this. That was, the main thing. Am I going to be able to sustain a lifestyle? But what made it the best is that I realized that I could dress up and I could become someone else. And learning to sing in different languages, the challenge of that, and then the extra challenge of communicating in that language to someone else.
A different language and a very different technique. Opera singers belt out songs without microphones.
We use muscles in a different way. So you hear some singers and it seems like the approach to singing is a lot less stress on their body. They have it here, the stress of their singing. But we as opera singers, we believe in supporting from down low. So you don't hear the or that kind of approach to singing. It's more we call it appoggio or leaned upon, supported upon. That's where our sound comes from, using our whole body to make this sound.
You really can't see people in the dark, but you feel it. And you feel that energy and you feel that these people are with you. And when you're there and you're just bearing your soul and singing and praying that everything comes out to a point where they're appreciating what you're doing, and you feel that energy come back, even if it's silent, you feel that energy. That is like electric to have.
Now, Heaston and Brownlee mentor up-and-coming opera singers like Corey McGee and Renee Richardson, seen here performing at Houston's Wheeler Avenue Baptist Church in 2023. And at the very same concert, George Shirley, who we mentioned earlier. Who is still performing at the age of 88. Classical music, an art form founded in Europe, yet drawing African American singers whose talents are often discovered and nurtured in a uniquely African American art form, gospel.
All America News brings you our people's contribution to America and freedom.
Jerry Smith and Sammy Stewart, famed band leader, talk it over. The Boogie Woogie Queen. Sammy led a 30-piece band as background for Jerry. That was for her Carnegie Hall appearance in her Cinco Symphonic concert, about which critics simply rave. This New Orleans miss is making a name for herself in music.
I love playing ragtime because it's really a uniquely African American musical style. I really wanted to play a piece by an African American composer, Artie Matthews, because I just feel so connected to my ancestry and my heritage when I get to play these pieces.
Ragtime in different parts of the country developed at around the late 1800s into the early 1900s, and it's a very important precursor to jazz because ragtime is a very syncopated dance music that for a long time had kind of a seedy reputation because it was sometimes played in the same places where maybe gambling and prostitution and drinking went on. And that's what kind of made ragtime an American craze by 1910 because people heard this music. They were familiar with a lot of the instruments, but they'd never heard the instruments played that way. And when James Reese Europe and the Harlem Hellfighters, who were a regiment during World War I that was formed in New York, they fought in France. But one of the things that people talked about the most were not what they did on the battlefield. French people were obsessed with the music. So ragtime is really, I think, the first version of black music in the United States that goes mainstream, that people across the country would have known. And then jazz kind of replaces ragtime in popularity.
Jazz is the musical expression of the triumph of the Negro spirit.
In New Orleans at the turn of the 20th century, some of the musicians who were the ones who were innovating what became known as jazz, they actually called what they were doing blues. There wasn't a distinction yet. What they were doing was playing blues, but they were using brass instruments.
The two restraining elements in jazz are the form and the changes. They are restraining because of their endless repetition, in much the same way that the Negro experiences the endless daily humiliation of American life.
Wherever you have people of African descent who have access to instruments like trumpets and saxophones, once they start playing those instruments using African musical sensibilities, that's where I think jazz is starting to originate. So we often look at New Orleans as the birthplace of jazz.
Of course, the Negro, as man and/or jazz man, must be constantly creative, for that is how he remains free.
And this is blues.
Wherever you go, I have you to know I wanna be with you. So that's what you call some R&B blues.
You better sing, Miss Naomi.
Blues is so essential to all of black music.
Blues is born out of an emotion.
It's emotion. And it's not all sad. It could be the happy blues. You know, it could be a jig, it could be a jubilee, but blues is basic in terms of African American music. Where does it come from? Somewhere deep in your soul.
The term rock and roll comes out of black vernacular. As early as the 1930s, there were songs that were talking about rocking and rolling. And some of them actually come from black women who sang the blues. Lots of references to "my daddy rocks me with a steady roll," right? And then after World War II is when the style of rock and roll started to take shape. But at the time, it was being called rhythm and blues.
Whether it was rock and roll, big band swing, blues, or jazz, African Americans sought their own elevated spaces and dance halls to host parties and performances.
They desired a venue where they were the guests and treated with dignity. Not just entertainers playing to white-only audiences during the Jim Crow era of segregation.
The El Dorado Ballroom in Houston's historic Third Ward provided that upscale place for Black Houstonians.
Just as the more famous Harlem institution known as the Savoy Ballroom is called the home of happy feet, the El Dorado adopted that nickname too. And a lot of prominent Black social clubs held events there. It became a gathering place. Ray Charles performed there. Duke Ellington performed there. Count Basie's played here. T-Bone Walker's played here. The great Conrad Johnson. In 1947 in Houston, he recorded a song called Howling on Dowling, back when Dowling Street was that drag that's now known as Emancipation Avenue. And in that song, he mentions the El Dorado. It represented achievement and status, both economically and socially among its patrons, but also among the musicians. People like I.H. Smalley, Ed Golden, Arnett Cobb, Milton Larkin. It was a prestige venue.
A young Jewel Brown cut her teeth at the El Dorado before performing with marquee acts like the legendary Louis Armstrong.
And now it's time for our vocalists to come up and entertain you. Here she comes, Jewel Brown, right here.
At the El Dorado, I was 12 years old when they called me. And I went there and used to do my show with a wonderful dance group called Tommy and Orr. They were some great guys. I never will forget it. Oh, and when I sang songs like C.C. Rider, oh my goodness, it's like the floors was just, it was really something else. And the windows back in the day, they pushed out from the bottom.
While on the weekends and at night, it was an adult establishment set up to entertain. It also had a role in the community that makes it extra important, and that is often on Saturday afternoons, they would have sock hops for teenagers and or talent shows where kids that couldn't go in a nightclub could come on a Saturday afternoon and they'd spin records and could dance. There are countless musicians, many of them natives of Houston and some who came from out of town, who first got their recognition by winning a talent show at El Dorado. One would be a musician who is known by the stage name Peppermint Harris, but then hometown folks like Joe Guitar Hughes, Johnny Guitar Watson, people like that when they were children got to perform on that stage, won talent shows that gave them the affirmation they perhaps could use to say, I've got a life in music. The El Dorado Ballroom. It did change a few times over the years. There was a fire at one time and there was some reconstruction. Once Project Row Houses acquired it, there were a series of events, particularly in those first few years. In November of 2003, that would have been the 100th anniversary of the birth of a native Houstonian, Don Roby, who went on to found Duke and Peacock Records.
It's the first time that there's a Black person in charge of what's going on. He predates so many of the Black entrepreneurs who are going to use music as a base of their economic empires. Without Don Roby, there's not even Berry Gordy in Detroit to be inspired by what he's seeing going on in Houston. He was inspired by Don Roby and Duke Peacock.
Big Mama Thornton and Bobby Bland and Junior Parker and all kinds of famous people.
Big Mama Thornton signed a record deal with Peacock and she made the song Hound Dog. And Hound Dog, of course, was covered by Elvis Presley.
Those artists received their props by way of the Rado's rebirth.
We drew a lot from folks who were still alive in the region and in the community that could come in and help us understand what the El Dorado had been, what it could be.
Under new direction, and with the generous support of Houston's philanthropic community to the tune of $10 million, the El Dorado Ballroom underwent a massive renovation and remodeling. In the spring of 2023, it reopened its doors as a special events venue.
So many American cities look the same, but when you find something that's distinctive, that's rooted in that place historically, and it isn't just physically there, but that is of that place, you know, that's a different kind of thing. It can meet a need as a place where people can connect with each other, connect with the neighborhood, connect with the city, and connect with our history.
My name is Michael Harris. I'm the longest running continuous talk show host in Houston at this time. I have been with KCOH since 1975. We played whatever happened to be hot at the time.
An R&B audience for sure, R&B and gospel. And it was pretty much like that across the country, but here there was just a taste of black country in there that I found unusual and appealing.
They would bring records to us to break. Remember, we also ended up in the movie Ray.
We're listening to that new recording, Mess Around, by Atlanta recording artist Ray Charles. And we have the gentleman live here in the KCOH studios. So Ray, when you're not making your own music, what do you listen to?
Well, you know what? The fact is, King B, man, I really and truly love gospel, man. I mean, one of my favorite groups is from right here in Houston, the Cecil Shaw Singers.
You heard it. Ray Charles endorses Houston's own Cecil Shaw.
Ray Charles, we broke records for him. James Brown, Parliament Funkadelic, even Charlie Pride came through.
The music was paramount to me, but then as I matured, I understood that I had an obligation to try to enrich a community too. We entertained people, but then we had a public service that helped stoke a movement because we were messengers.
I played message songs, I played speeches from Dr. King, from Malcolm, and other folk, because people needed to hear those words.
And what you and I have to let the man know is we are peaceful people. We are loving people. We love everybody who loves us.
And I think this march will go down as one of the greatest, if not the greatest, demonstrations for freedom and human dignity ever held in the United States. I'm sure that many things will happen as a result of the march.
Music played a very large role in the civil rights movement.
And you know, with the civil rights movement, I think you can especially hear how gospel, rhythm and blues, and rock and roll are all cousins. The songs that demonstrators were singing sometimes were revamped spirituals. So just like during the Civil War, when freed people were taking spirituals and changing the lyrics and talking about Abraham Lincoln and the Union Army, people in the 1960s kind of remix the spirituals and make them about the civil rights movement.
From the civil rights movement to now, the role of black radio remains prominent.
I always say to you, you never know who stops by the happy hour, of course. My boss is always walking through the neighborhood. Mr. Walker, you like to come up and say a little something?
I'm going to say a little something. How you doing, BZ?
Well, I'm Ernest Walker, General Manager of KTSU 90.9, your community station on the campus of Texas Southern University, and also an amazing drummer.
Do you recognize this one, right?
My dad would play KTSU in our house every single Sunday. We had a family gospel group called the Walker Brothers, and KTSU was actually the very first station that ever played our record and gave us a chance. So my dad was very loyal to KTSU, and for this to come full circle, for me to be here today is an honor.
What is it that you love about music?
I love how music brings people together. It tells a story. It can make you happy. It can make you sad when you're going through challenges in life. You can turn on to some good music and it can change your attitude, your mindset.
KTSU 90.9 has played it all from the HBCU campus of Texas Southern University since 1973, when it became the first African-American FM radio station on Houston airwaves.
At KTSU, you have what we call like a gumbo mix of music. Normally when you tune into the radio station, you get one genre of music, but when you tune into KTSU, you can get jazz, you can get blues, you can get zydeco, you can get hip hop, You can get gospel music.
Like other black radio stations before them, KTSU provided a platform for artists to launch their careers.
KTSU launched a program that was called Kids Jam on Saturdays. And when there was no other station in the city that would play hip-hop, the up-and-coming artists came to KTSU, and we had a platform, and they said, let's play hip-hop on Saturdays. And that's how it all started, with a show called Kids Jam. And when you think of the Ghetto Boys or UGK or Lil Kiki or any of those local artists, this was the station that gave them a chance. And we continue to do that today.
There is also a recording studio for artists to use at KTSU. And when no one is recording, there's still music being made, and artists marching to the beat of their own drum, including Ernest, the very man at the top, forever in tune with his campus and the community, including yours truly.
I'm ready to hit the road.
A new decade ushered in old sound that took black music back to its roots.
And I think you can hear that in some of the funk music of the late 60s, early 70s, where people start producing these 9-minute songs. Parliament maybe might have a 15-minute song, right? And a lot of that is trying to intentionally tap into the music of our ancestors. That emphasis on rhythm is so key to late 60s, early 70s music. People were being very intentional about these heavy, hard rhythms.
Funk music is a sound that coincided right along with disco.
Jim Crow told people where they were allowed to exist. You cannot go here if your skin is this color. You can't sit in this part of the bus. But then I think that there's a reason that disco is the post-civil rights music. The dance music also had qualities of liberation that were part of it. I think that disco is liberation music. When I hear it, all disco has a message of uplift. It is all about I will survive and I'm coming out. And all of these songs, You Make Me Feel Mighty Real by Sylvester, right, almost feels like a declaration of independence in of itself. And I think if you look at the people who were the most popular disco artists, these are all people of color, they are diverse women, and you also have a lot of influence of LGBTQ musicians in disco. And I think that that's where some of the liberating aspects of disco come from. It's just maybe not happening in a march, it's happening on a dance floor. A lot of R&B and funk artists start to incorporate rap verses into their songs. So the rap verse on a song kind of becomes standard in around 1980.
By the early 1980s, Houston rap artists were just coming into their own,
giving birth to the H-Town sound and a new generation of music producers, artists, and musicians who are unapologetically H-Town.
both in their music and style.
The H-Town sound is unapologetically Houston, just like three of its biggest stars.
This is 3 generations of hip-hop.
I make big money, I drive big cars.
Willie D of the Ghetto Boys.
First generation, 80s into the 90s.
H-Town, Texas, tell me how does it look?
Bun B, the Trill OG.
Second generation, 90s into the 2000s.
I'm draped up and dripped.
And Little Kiki.
This is third generation, 2000 into the 2010s.
All three rep Houston, and that H-Town sound hard. They'll quickly tell you Houston had to stand out from the start.
Before Ghetto Boys, they really thought that we were still riding around on horses and wagons out here.
What was it about the Ghetto Boys sound that was able to break through?
It was H-Town. It was us being the underdogs. For a while, we were consumers. People in Houston was just buying records, and at some point, we was like, we got something to say too. So we started chronicling our experiences, our Southern experiences, our Houston experiences. Like we wasn't familiar with subways. We wasn't familiar with gangs and things like that. So we talked about the things that we did know.
Neighborhoods and life in the streets drove the lyrics. It's an entire culture with its own language. a love language that spoke to fans and music execs.
With the cars and the candy paint and the swingers, it's like a vibe.
Once you stepped in the streets, you realize how powerful it was, how big the influence was.
84s, red toes, candy apple flip-flop.
Now you're talking about bumper kits and grills and elbows and all that.
On the streets or the slab, you'll find 4.4s, a vintage car rim.
The 4.4s is 4 of the foes. That's 484s.
But you could also come from the 4.4.
Which is Acres Homes, right?
Which is Acres Homes.
Right.
So these terms work together.
7,
You could be holding the
8.
slab in a slab, riding on 4 foes in the 4.4. You could put all that together and you would not be having any double negatives.
Still tipping on 4.4.
And I still hear it all the time. You still hear this 20-year-old song from sports arenas to Texans games.
That's a testament to our culture. That's what we explaining, that there is no other culture that's going to continue to be the driving force of making these songs.
And that's why at the end of the day, you know, good music is good music. If you just put it in pocket, you got a good beat, you know, you got good words, you got a nice hook, you know, and you're saying something substantive, people will respond and they'll reward you for it.
It seems like Houston artists love to collaborate. Am I right?
No, because we all actually genuinely like each other.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.
There is mutual respect and admiration for those no longer here, like Bushwick Bill, Pimp C, Fat Pat, and the legendary DJ Screw, all influenced other Houston heavy hitters. Artists like Paul Wall and Mike Jones were able to build their brands from the foundation already laid by the pioneers of the sound. Collectively, they have cranked out so many classics. Together, they'll just keep swinging and banging.
Music built this attractive Los Angeles home for Jessie Mae Robinson, whose tunes have been heard and sung by millions in recent years.
Black musicians have composed, conceptualized, played, and sung in just about every genre and for every audience.
And on some occasions, they have combined all these sounds and talents to create something really special. Singer-songwriter and musician Gabe Baker has a special touch with the cello. An instrument and sound that's made him a standout both now and then.
So I was kind of the football guy who could play the cello around campus for a little time period.
Gabe attended Rice University, where he studied environmental engineering and was captain of the football team, making 3 bowl appearances and 1 conference championship.
I played at a couple student athlete events.
Back then, Gabe played the cello casually, more so as a hobby, dabbling in the campus orchestra and taking lessons when he could find the time.
For one semester, I took lessons from a grad student here at the Shepherd School, all until I broke my hand during football spring practices. So to me, it was like a colliding of 2 worlds. Like, I just remember I was like, hey man, I can't take lessons anymore.
We recently caught up with Gabe inside the Shepherd School of Music at Rice University. Years later, his hand is more than fine.
You're so balanced, I'm so wavy, you're so steady.
Gabe now plays and tours with the international Christian pop duo sensation for King and Country, traveling the world playing to packed audiences from Australia to the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo.
I get so much satisfaction for doing music in general, and then also being able to like branch out into different expressions of it, instrumentally, even songwriting or collaboration wise. Not feeling like I have to be in a certain box or a certain aspect of music gives me a lot of satisfaction.
And it gives him a lot of freedom to be himself and create.
I think you just want to be you in the space of creating, and whatever comes out of that you-ness as a creative, you want to live in that, but also want to fine-tune your sound.
While remembering his roots.
But nothing and no one's ever gonna shut me down, no.
I'm definitely a homage to so many great creatives that have come before me.
And like those who came before him, pushing musical boundaries, Gabe could very well define the next genre and sound.
But I'm looking at these traveling shoes, yes I am. I'm looking at these traveling. Oh, I'm looking at these traveling shoes. I'm looking at these traveling shoes. I'm looking at these traveling shoes. Oh.
Music festivals bring artists to the people, and in the case of Juneteenth, to the very heart of 3rd Ward and Emancipation Park.
In 1872, 4 former enslaved men purchased the land that is Emancipation Park for African Americans to have a place to celebrate Juneteenth. Today, there are multiple celebrations, including an annual music festival.
I think you could have a debate on what's more important to Juneteenth, the barbecue or the music. Going way back to the early 20th century, I have evidence of Juneteenth celebrations being a place where the organizers spotlighted the local music of what was going on. So Juneteenth has long supported local musical talent. Music is such a part of Black society. It's part of the thing that I think that we have maintained from our ancestors, that there are different versions of music for different events, different settings. And I think if you look at something like Juneteenth in Emancipation Park, whose headlining is always a big deal and a big draw to it, it also shows just the significance of music to Black history and especially the history of emancipation itself.
This Juneteenth, there is so much to celebrate. The grandmother of Juneteenth, 97-year-old Opal Lee, recently received the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the highest civilian honor one can receive. She was bestowed the recognition for her decades-long campaign to establish Juneteenth as a federal holiday, a dream that came to fruition in 2021.
Another dream soon to be fulfilled, the Gospel House and Museum in historic 3rd Ward, not too far from Emancipation Park. The Wesley African Methodist Episcopal Church is undergoing a renovation and revitalization to be transformed into a museum and cultural performing arts center. Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee recently announced a first-of-its-kind $4.1 million grant awarded to the city of Houston for the adaptive reuse of the historic church.
And while there's a National Juneteenth Museum scheduled to open in Fort Worth, Texas in 2026, historian Sam Collins continues to advocate for an international museum in the birthplace of Juneteenth, Galveston, with hopes for an interactive museum experience to include sound and music.
The legacy of song continues from churches to concert halls, festivals, and even classrooms.
Be sure to download and share our specially curated Juneteenth playlist on KHOU.com and watch on KHOU 11+.
It's up to all of us to continue to educate one another about the importance of Juneteenth as we remember where we came from and what we can achieve in the future.
Say